seconds for us to get started here. This is the traffic fallacy. And one thing, a little bit about us to get us started here. We're exploring this idea where if you go to this website, lcm.io/feedback, at Last Call, the organization I work for, we're huge in the feedback. So as I go around giving this talk, what's been great is this idea. Folks can perhaps have it up on their laptop or on their phone, and then as you hear things, as questions come up, or as you think of things that I could improve, or something like that, you just simply write it in the box, and then when you're done, you can hit submit. Perhaps your feedback is on this whole idea of getting feedback in general. But I do take it seriously, and then it helps shape future iterations of this talk. Hey. Whoa. Great, and a little bit about me. I kind of have this unique role at the agency that I work for. On the one hand, I help figure out what problem we're trying to solve for the organizations that we work with, and most importantly, for who and why we're trying to solve that problem, sort of product development. On the other hand, I sort of the team that I work with at Last Call, we insert ourselves inside larger organizations or teams and help figure out, workflow, how we can get sort of an idea from a concept to completion with the understanding that we're kind of bringing some industry best practices and our experience to kind of complement the efforts of the existing team. So I focus a lot on helping bring kind of agile and lean values and principles into action to help reduce a lot of common friction that may exist in software development. And at Last Call, we're a full-service agency that does a lot of work in the higher ed and the nonprofit in the government space. So we help build engaging solutions that help these organizations that we work with support and improve their communities and connect with them in a greater way. And a little while ago, and I live in New York City, so every once in a while I get to go to places where the traffic isn't so bad, but I came to Austin and the traffic was already pretty bad, so folks here are familiar with the traffic. It's pretty terrible. But anyway, I was in New York and I was stuck in traffic. And I was thinking to myself, all right, in 2018, we're solving a lot of problems. There's still a lot of problems in the world, right? But we're not really there's not really a lot of attention given to massive traffic jams, right? Traffic problems. Or so I thought, right? Just how I felt sitting in traffic at the moment. So I Googled, where is the worst traffic in the world, right? And I came across an interesting story. I gave it a little focus to just the United States because the world got a little overwhelming. And in 2004, there was a study done that concluded that Houston, like many cities, had a major traffic problem. It was taking too long to go from A to B, and as the city was experiencing a massive population growth, its roads and infrastructure hadn't really grown to support that increase in population. So traffic, greater number of people on the same amount of roads, traffic was only getting worse. So there's this Katy freeway. Yeah, all right, nice. That's awesome. Yeah. Cool. Anyone here ever not been stuck in traffic on the Katy freeway during the day?
Now it's better.
It's better now? Cool.
What did they do? 2 weeks ago.
HOV lane.
Perfect. All right, so I'm going to pick your brain afterwards on what your thoughts are here because I only go from what the literature says on this and the media. But essentially, Interstate 10 connects downtown Houston to Katyland, Texas, right? So it's about 30 miles. And took about 41 minutes to go those 28 miles when they conducted this survey. So that's kind of
That's good.
That's good. But that's on average, right? A lot of times I'm imagining you could be stuck there for hours. I was curious, and just before this, just to prepare myself, be equipped, because I'm in a room with potentially some Texans. Right now, if you try to go do this little journey here, it'd take you about an hour and 20 minutes, right? Just if you left right now. So I'm sure it's worse and sometimes better. But on average, 41 minutes according to this study. So in 2004, this nonprofit, the American Highway Users Alliance, published their findings, and they concluded that, in their opinion, the Katy Freeway in Houston was the second most congested road in America, right? Measured in hours, they calculated that drivers sit in traffic, essentially doing nothing, right, because you're sitting in traffic, 25 million hours a year, right? And you can't do anything. You're in this predicament where you can't do anything productive. You can't read a book. Perhaps you can call someone and chat and catch up, strengthen those relationships, but you're kind of stuck in your car. And then I thought, okay, what is 25 million hours? What if I contextualize that a little bit? And if you take that divided by the number of average hours in a lifetime, that's 40 lifetimes a year that's spent on this highway. And with population just increasing, right, at the time, given their current model, the delay would more than double by 2025. So to put a dollar amount on it, let's assume quickly that the average rider sitting in traffic has the opportunity to spend that time doing something else, and that would have a value of about, say, $20 an hour on average. So 25 million times $20 is about $500 million in lost opportunity, right? And then you've got a bunch of other indirect costs that come along with that too. Like if you've got a babysitter, you need to spend more money to have the babysitter stay a little later. If you're a shipping company, you have more fuel costs because your trucks are sitting on the highway longer. And all that sort of passes through. So recognizing that this was just an unacceptable state of affairs, the state sought to solve this problem. And so that same organization concluded that the reason for this terrible traffic was that there are bottlenecks caused by too many cars on too little road, which can be, which is about half of it. The other half are traffic accidents, work zones, bad weather, poor signals, just random events for the other half. And so they saw this and they thought, okay, this first half, this is something we can fix. The other half seemed to be random and unavoidable, but if we can address half of it, that would be a significant improvement. So their conclusion, right? Too many cars, not enough freeway. Pretty logical, I think. And then I'm imagining that there was this room full of really smart highway engineers, and they said something along the lines, this is an assumption, right? Extra capacity would surely solve this problem. More lanes would mean more room for more cars, which would shorten travel times, right? There's more road. So therefore, let's grab our shovels, let's send out that RFP, we're going to build this giant freeway. And so the state of Texas spent $2.8 billion after this as the result of this study to widen the Katy Freeway to 26 lanes in certain parts. So I've never driven on it, and I was hoping that maybe there's a Drupal Camp Houston, so maybe one day I can. I may be the only one who ever wants to go there to actually sit on this. Yeah. But that's massive, right? So, okay, that's great. $2.8 billion, that's a great project. That's a lot of money. You got to be really sure about this. But there's just one problem, right? The congestion on this freeway has actually become worse in several years after the construction project was completed, from 41 minutes to 64 minutes, right? Travel times increased about 55%. So this only goes, my data only goes to 2014. It's 2018, so maybe this has changed. But also very curious about that. But anyway, how could this kind of be, right? It kind of flies in the face of common sense. You make more lanes, you can fit more things, get things through faster. And they went back to the data and they ran more models, and they found out that yes, perhaps in the event that the number of cars remained the same, the extra freeway capacity would have sped things up. But it just so happened that as the number of lanes increased, the extra capacity increased, the number of cars also increased. So the ratio remained the same. In fact, it got worse. So what do we do about this? And then they looked around and they realized, hey, this isn't just in Texas, right? Obviously, we deal with traffic, terrible traffic all over the world. You have the 50-lane Hong Kong-Macau expressway here. This is like one early evening in the summer, and people are just parked, right? They're not going anywhere. This may be from 25 million hours a year. I wonder if they have the data. I imagine this number is higher, right? That's ridiculous. But this isn't intentional, I'm imagining, right? Freeway engineers, the people who work really hard to improve this problem, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that I think that they have our best interests at heart and they have the best intentions, which is helping us get from A to B as quickly as possible. Right? So I could speculate for a second as to how this always happens, but the reality is that based on the data, the extra capacity didn't decrease the time to go from A to B on this highway. So the real challenge, I think, for city streets is to move people, right, not cars, efficiently. It's important that I get from A to B. My car perhaps doesn't necessarily need to get there. There are maybe alternative ways, public transit. And that's a whole other can of worms, right? But I think that's essentially our goal here, is to move people. So the conclusion, I think, in thinking about this in the context of Agile and Lean values and principles and the way that I understand this, is that despite these capacity increases, too many vehicles in progress means continued high road utilization, right? High throughput times and idling cars, right? The road, there's too many things on the road, right? So the throughput time is high. It takes a long time to go from the on-ramp to the off-ramp. And in the middle of all that, you're idling, right? That's undesirable. So when the freeway is full, right, we need slack in our freeway system to handle the inevitable variations, right? Vehicles are different sizes. We all drive differently, different speeds, different skill levels. Some people, unfortunately, still text and drive, right? Lane merging, aggressive driving, angry, who knows? But there's variation in these vehicles. So we need slack to kind of account for that, to have room in the freeway. So instead of increasing the amount of road, right, and since we can't control variation in vehicles, right, we can't make everybody drive a four-door sedan that's identical and drive the same exact way, not yet at least, then we need slack in our system. We need a vehicles in progress limit. And cities know this, like where I'm from. Their solution to this traffic problem lies in reducing the number of vehicles in Manhattan at any given time, right? And they're experimenting with something called congestion pricing to make it more expensive to enter the city at certain times to help dissuade people from driving into the city. I think it costs to go over one bridge to New Jersey, and I can never remember the name of this bridge, but I think to go over it during peak travel times costs $18, right? So it's really steep. And there are several reasons why it's a terrible idea for a lot of people to have such steep pricing, but they're experimenting with it. And of course, it's very, very contentious, and it was rejected as of the end of March of this year, so no-go on this idea. Stockholm had a unique challenge, right? They had their population is growing rapidly, but it's essentially a series of islands linked by tunnels and bridges. So unlike some cities in the United States or around the world, they can't just build more roads, right? They don't have enough land. So they needed to solve this creatively. So they set up this time-box experiment for 6 months, and they said it'll cost $1 to enter the main city area during peak travel times, and then effort to potentially help reduce congestion. And it was fiercely political, right? The people of Stockholm hated this idea, but when people saw the data after they set up this experiment at the end of the 6 months, right, the average travel time to go from A to B, right, we want to move people, not cars, decreased by 50%. So it took you half the amount of time to get to where you were going, on average. And when you got there, a nice added benefit was that the emissions in the city dropped by about 18%. So it was, nicer to breathe, nicer to work there, nicer perhaps to live there. So they decreased the number of vehicles, and when they saw this data, it became permanent. So that's all nice, but a lot of us, I think, work in software development, right? So we have our own politics that we have to navigate in our organizations, and fortunately for most of us, maybe not all of us, don't have a state legislature that we have to navigate to try new things on our teams. And I don't know about everyone else, but when I tried to experiment with a lot of these things on our teams, I didn't have $2.8 billion or anywhere near that amount of money to help solve this problem. So how many of us, when we're talking about our freeways and software development, have looked in our backlog or a list of things that we need to do and thought, wow, this list just keeps getting longer and longer and longer. Things are taking forever and ever and ever, and it feels like nothing is getting done, right? Is there anyone in here who can relate with that? Definitely been in that situation. And then who, like myself, thought, okay, well, you got a lot of things you need to do, and people seem to be crazy busy, so if we just hire more people, right, and we put more people onto this project, it'll get done faster, right? That's what we need. And bring on more people. And then another thing that we looked at before we decided to perhaps bring on more people when we were experimenting with this thinking was we looked at our task lists, right? And we had people who had like 60 things assigned to them, right? Just people who had been working there on this team forever, and it was just the status quo to be like, oh yeah, you want that? Just assign it to that person, and they're used to it. It'll get done eventually, right? So we kind of lacked visibility into that, but we had people who were incredibly busy, doing a lot of really great work, working their hardest, and they just had so many things assigned to them, but very little was actually getting done. So everyone, when we look at things like ourselves and our teams, when we join organizations and work along with their teams, something that we see a lot is that folks are incredibly busy, right, and working really hard and doing the best that they can. And yet value, right, our ultimate measure of success here on the projects that we build is taking a little bit too long to get to the customer, right? The idea from the marketing team being executed through the software development team, if it needs to go through that team, to sitting on production where you can truly measure its value was taking too long, right? But everyone was crazy busy. People had way too much on their plate. And tasks were kind of sitting around in all these various states, waiting for people to become free to finally work on them. And it was causing a tremendous amount of stress, right? When you look at your list and you see things that are assigned to you, when you come into work every morning and there are 60 things on your to-do list, it's like a totally undesirable state. So we learned that, much like the freeway, that differences in task variation, not all tasks, not all projects are the same, not all people are the same, makes it difficult to provide scheduling predictions, right? When something will get done, when something will be live, when the marketing team can start measuring something working. So in addition to that, to maintain that, we need to focus on providing customer experience, right? So all these secondary costs, account managers who can handle those conversations about something being delayed, or someone who can help with scheduling the team and moving people around to get something done. There's a lot of this additional work that was created that's essentially superfluous. It doesn't contribute back to the value that we're delivering with the thing that we want to get live in production that we can measure. So a lot of that was super expensive, we realized. So we thought to ourselves, by looking at the way that we manage projects, it was from a traditional project management, from the traditional literature, business literature, you may call it the command and control model, right? You meet with your team and their schedule for the week or the few weeks looks a little light, or you're not too sure, but hey, better to have more things assigned to you than not enough. You're looking a little light, here's a few more things, because traditional management literature, I found, finds that people need to be 100% utilized if you want to get things done. Just make sure that everyone's always busy. Put things on their plate. So the goal of project management was to make sure that everyone always had a full plate of work assigned to them. And we kept asking ourselves, everyone's incredibly busy, but things are taking too long to get into production and sitting around in queues of various states. Are these two things, delivering value with predictability and keeping people busy, are those things mutually exclusive? Is there a world where people can be busy and things can get done on time? Does that sound like some utopian state that's just unheard of in software development? Especially perhaps people who work on government projects sometimes. And like I said, we don't have billions of dollars. So how can we as a team kind of work with what we have, who we are, the team that's here, the tools that we have, the space that we have, and try to improve things, try to move towards perhaps this destination state that may sound super impossible to get to. So we experimented with what if we focused instead of keeping people busy all the time, we prioritized delivering value, getting things through, getting the idea through to the customer as quickly as possible. What if that became our priority? And what if we were okay with the fact that maybe some days some people are a little light, right? It's an easy day. Is that a bad thing? Right? We asked ourselves, we joke about it, and it's like, no, of course it's not a bad thing. Easy days are great. And then when you get into conversations sometimes with executives or leadership, it's like everyone's got to be busy. There's just so much to do. So it's what I mean by navigating our own organizational politics and structures. But anyway, if I were to summarize that previous slide, it's something that's perhaps more fun to say. What if we as a team, what if our goal was to get our ideas or get the idea into action quickly, right? Something live on production where we can see it and feel good about it. And also, what if we could work in a sustainable pace, right? So what if instead of forcing people or making people feel like they got to work weekends and miss those opportunities with their lives and work late, we said, hey, look, let's respect the workday. We're going to do this, and we're going to get it done in a workday. So a lot of this comes from, as its roots, if folks are familiar with the Kanban method, right? So if that's the case, then a lot of this is going to be pretty familiar. But we avoid trying to put big labels on things like Kanban, right? Because I think the underlying ideas here can be a lot more powerful than the label. But I don't want to pretend like that's not where this comes from. So we familiarize ourselves with that literature, right, a little bit, and it was still kind of vague and high level at the time. But the big things that stuck out to us were visualizing our process, limiting our work in progress, and then my favorite part was thinking about where we're at by having all this visibility into the greater system, and then working together as a team, right, on how we want to improve that and get toward that, closer toward that utopian state, right? And none of this, there is no fourth item here that says you got to work weekends, you got to miss your kid's soccer game, you got to, ruin your life, you got to dedicate yourself to this idea. So this first step that we talk about a lot was really easy, right? A lot of us find ourselves, I got carried away in an electronic tool, right? You're in your Jira, you got your backlog, you're just creating tasks, moving things around, you got your boards. But we moved out of that. We went old school for a few weeks, and we set up a physical board with columns representing different work states, and the whole team could kind of see every morning, right? Because at the time we were co-located, so we were all in the same space. Kind of the whole system, the thing as a whole, right? What's in progress, who's working on it, what's blocked by something else, who can help someone else was a big thing, right? Where are there opportunities for shared learning? Who has too much to do, right? Who has too little? That's something that the team can sort of quickly see within minutes on this board. Are there any bottlenecks here? Is there something that we can discuss as a team? It also makes hidden work apparent too, like someone who may have 4 things in progress, but really 2 of those things are being tested by someone else. So what's the status with that? Can we talk about that? Should we represent that differently? And then, we limited our work in progress because we asked ourselves this pretty fundamental question: how many things can you really work on at one time? We may have a lot of things that we've got in our purview, a lot of things that we are working on or are about to work on, but I'm working on one thing at a time, right? That's the truth. I can't do 3 things at once, although sometimes it feels like I am. So from that, right, we realize that when we have a really high work in progress limit, right, when we have a lot of things that kind of build up in one queue, and a lot of people are working on a lot of things, it's easy to get distracted, right? If you commit to one thing and you need to see that one thing through, it's a different mindset, we found, sometimes, than when you have 4 things assigned you and you can just jump between those 4 things. So decreased concentration, and hey, look, this one thing is assigned to me, I'm working on it, I said I'd get it done, it's a little too difficult, I'm just going to jump to this other thing and wrap up my day there, right? When there could be an interesting opportunity for someone to help that person, right? And sort of help transition that knowledge and that understanding and help strengthen the team as a whole. Well, our bottlenecks became clear, and we marked, and I'll show an example of this too in a second, what our work in progress limits were on the board. So it's a lot more fun, I think, in an electronic tool when you have whip limits and you try to drag something into the column and it's like, no way, But on a physical board, you really got to be diligent about it because the whiteboard's not going to throw an error, right? It's going to let you put the card there. So where do we get these work in progress limits? Right? How do we know what the right number is? And there are some rules of thumb and there are some tips and tricks, but it's really about, as a team, deciding on an initial number for that board, right? For that column, right? And you could say the whip limit should be the one less than the number of people on the team, right? That's one thing. But sometimes the team is multidisciplinary and they come from a variety of backgrounds and they're being brought into the project for a number of reasons. So that may not make a lot of sense. But it's a conversation. If the thinking there is brought to the team may decide on its own what a good number there is. And then remaining flexible and open, either on a day-to-day basis when you keep running into an issue with that whip limit, if it's too high or if it's too low, by having a conversation where the team can decide to change it if necessary. So we have these cards that represent kind of the work unit, the idea itself, that we want to get through the system as quickly as possible, right? So we use Jira pretty heavily, but we come from a background where we've used a wide variety of other tools like Basecamp and Redmine and Asana. All great, right? All of their strengths and weaknesses, but essentially you take this one little card and this represents the idea, the thing that you're trying to get done, and that is what moves through the board. So that card, right, where does that card go? Simple stuff here for us who've worked on software development projects for a little while. You take your list of work, you prioritize it, based on the business value, 1, 2, 3, what's the most important, what's going to have the greatest impact to the organization. That's, just to be really reductive here for a second, that's a backlog. And the team works from top to bottom, and they organize themselves around that list, right, and decide how to pull the work to themselves rather than having it be assigned to them. So here's my simple board that I use in my apartment to visualize the work that I have going on in my life, right? I've got these little flow units, right? These little things that I'm working on, and I visualize my work. I hold a daily stand-up with myself every morning at 8, and I pull tasks to doing when I'm doing them. I work on them, and I get them done, and I kind of rinse and repeat the next day. Perhaps, this is at least the thinking, right? The reality is I get there and it's just, I got to navigate the fact that I'm not totally autonomous in my own life in deciding what I get done that day, but I can at least, the effort's there. I pull something to myself, and when I'm done, I move it over to done, right? So since I have a whip limit of 1 on this board, I have to move 134 to done before I decide to take 152. Because I promised myself what's really important to me is that I won't leave work unfinished in these various states. Because to me in my life, I've realized that unfinished work is kind of useless, leaving something at 70%. Or maybe I'll get something to 70% and realize that 70% is actually good enough, and then I'll move it to done. But I'm not just going to leave it at 70% and move on. So now I'm in this situation here, which is what life looks like sometimes, where I've got 3 things I'm doing. And the big problem here, can anyone see perhaps what a problem with this board is? If you're on this team, everyone's really busy, they're doing a lot of things, and you're inspecting my life, and you're like, what's going on here? Anyone have any hunches?
Can't do 3 things at once.
Can't do 3 things at once, that's true. I'm also not really
So you're probably holding people up.
holding people up.
Or interdependent.
Yeah, yep, very true. There's people in my life that would have been nodding their head right now at you. That's great. Yeah, yep. I'm a bottleneck. I try not to be, but also nothing's getting done to the point of holding things up. So in our lives, do you have something?
So what leads you to have a circumstance like this? External factors, bosses, clients?
Yeah, issues not actually related to our craft. A lot of times related to organizational issues or organizational culture. It may be, right, this isn't, we've seen this go where you throw up a quick board and you're trying your hardest to kind of bring this thinking to light because you've seen what it can do and how it can help and help the teams move faster. And then someone comes in, just to pick on the bosses here because that's an easy one quick. And there may be someone on the team who's a little light that day, right? And that, in the traditional management literature, that looks like waste, right? Because that person may be salary, right? And you can put something on their plate, right? And it's in that act when you have all these things that are in progress. And our boards in software development on larger teams are far more complex. That's when those bottlenecks can appear, when people are juggling multiple things. And that's what slows things down. So it's definitely a paradigm shift. And a lot of these things are really easy to say, and a lot of the ideas behind it are perhaps easy to connect with. And then when it gets brought to the real world, when it's brought to the teams, right, there are organizational factors that have to be considered. For sure. Yeah, I think in this utopian world, everyone would agree, right, that you work on one thing at once. And you get that done, then you move on to the next. But the bosses, the clients, the this, the that, they come in and they want to add something to it, and it just continues.
Or would it ever be the case that, you have 3 in the doing because you're waiting on someone that's like, you send off the work and you need a decision, or you need, someone to prototype it so that you can make a decision on that, and you would just leave them there because you knew there was more to be done?
Yeah, that's a common thing that we run into. Yeah, we've got boards now too where, did you want to actually contribute?
I was just saying that we have another column that's like needs info.
I like that idea.
Review,
Yeah.
internal review or something to that nature, where it's not just to do the
Dependencies,
doing the
basically.
done. It's like you add a couple more that's like, if there's something that you need back, you put it in needs info. Well, that's when he was going.
That's perfect though. Yeah, exactly. And the other thing to add to that we found is one point of friction sometimes on teams is exactly that. They work on something and they get it all the way, and then they need someone to give feedback on it, right? But that person's just way too busy. So then it just sits in that queue, and you're looking at it, and you're like, I worked hard on that thing, and no one's paying attention to it. So one thing that we're trying is, if we changed our understanding of what the task was, and maybe the task isn't this, if we're prototyping something, maybe the task is to build a prototype for it and deliver it for feedback, right?
Breaking up the task in a different way so that you're not waiting and you can complete it because it's within control.
Yeah, so the team feels like, okay, that's something we can do. We can prototype this and get it to the leadership team, and then they can sit and done. And then whenever they get around to deciding it's real again, we can start the clock and put it back into
You
do.
do a new task for that then.
Yeah, that's one. Yeah, we obviously the team would want to talk about it, but sometimes we'll do that. Yeah, but more common than not, you just add a column for it, right? So here's, because self-realm is far more complex than my to-do list. Our board may look like this. You may have, your to-do, right? And that's just the leadership team or whoever your stakeholders are can throw things into the to-do column. If that's the way that you have to organize your work, is that your stakeholders can throw things directly into to-do. Sometimes you may have someone who's like a business, can play the business role, who can help coordinate with that, and then they throw things into do. And then the team may analyze those things. And we've seen analyze have a WIP limit of 4, just to make sure that the number of things that the team is reflecting on is limited. And then selected for development, right? The team is ready for it. The team understands and what needs to get done on this task to move it to done. And then in progress. So the team perhaps wrapped up a few things, and this is the representation of the board in the morning. So the way that this would work is that they'd pull, they'd decide, hey, someone may say, 147 looks great to me. I'm going to take 147 and I'm going to work on that today. And then there's this transition state where they pull it to themselves. Rather than I think the alternative is you may have a management role who's saying something like, you're going to work on this today and I'm going to move this to you. And then you're kind of in this position, right, when we talk about things like safety on teams and feeling like challenging yourself or perhaps being thrown into a situation you may not want, right? It should be a conversation that the team has where they decide, hey, I'm going to go for 147. That all right, everybody? And everyone's more likely than not going to be like, sure, that sounds great, And if you have questions, you get stuck anywhere, kick it to Sarah or something like that, right? Another developer on the team who could help. The team moves things from one end of the board to the other. So we've seen situations, right, remaining flexible with our thinking. That someone may take something in progress, work on it for a couple hours, and realize, okay, I don't know why I thought I could do this one. This one is just far too ambitious. So I'm going to kick this one back to selected for development. Or perhaps, I thought this thing was ready, but it's not. We're waiting on this other dependency. So I'm going to kick that all the way back to to-do. So when the team kind of has visibility into the board as a whole, like they do right here, there are opportunities for that shared learning and working together to pull things through. Also, it makes clear, like, oh, wow, Sarah's really holding up this team here because she's got all these tasks assigned to her. Are there ways that we can help? Other developers can help with that. So that helped us by visualizing this with folks who have too much to do and folks who have too little to do, right? Helping find that right balance. And really, the more modern literature on how this works is asking the question, who's adapting to who? Right? In the traditional literature, you have resource efficiency, right? So in an example, if you were to put a camera on the developer's shoulder, right, they would be constantly working on a task. They'd be going from one task to another task to another task, just running around, always working on a task, right? And then those tasks may be in different states at different times, but they're always working on a task. If we switched, rather than having it be most important that the team member be busy, when we switched to this idea of flow efficiency, right, the most important thing for us was that the thing itself, the value that the client wanted, the organization wanted, what the marketing team wanted, that was our priority. And we wanted to move that to production as quickly as possible. So that may take 3 team members working on that one thing, right? And they may be working on it at different times. And in that situation, if you put a camera on the flow unit's shoulder, right, the flow unit, the card itself, the thing itself is constantly busy, constantly moving. But if you flipped it around and you had something on the team member's shoulder, the developer maybe have an idle moment, right, where they're not so busy, right, where they've kind of found an opportunity to catch up on something else, to brushing up their skills, to take a little bit longer of a lunch, or whatnot. but the team itself is deciding how they want to get this flow unit through. They're attacking the thing itself and moving that through, rather than being themselves incredibly busy. And the definition here, flow efficiency, and we'll break this down in a second, is the sum, right? So if you're to think about how to measure your flow efficiency, right, to get a little mechanical about it for a second, it's the sum of your value-adding activities, right, the things that contribute to increasing the fidelity of this thing that you're trying to get into production, in relation to the throughput time, how long it takes to get from start to finish. So putting this in an expression here quickly, you have your value-adding activities, so the time the developer's working on it, time that's being tested, time that the creative team is envisioning how to build something like this, and then throughput time is how long it takes to get through your process. How long was it from when the stakeholders said, we need this thing, we need this, to it was sitting in production as something that they could see? That's your throughput time. And your flow efficiency is just a numerical calculation of that. So if you use an electronic tool, Jira will tell you something like this. So it's an operation strategy, right? And not something that a business would say, well, we're going to achieve flow efficiency. That's how we're going to, that's our business model, flow efficiency. It's like, how do we organize ourselves operationally? Is by pursuing this flow efficiency strategy where we try to reduce the time spent on non-value adding activities like waiting, like being stuck in traffic on a freeway, right? It doesn't mean we can't increase our flow efficiency by working any faster, right? We just want to reduce the amount of time that's spent doing nothing. So as a quick example here to illustrate the point, so I've got a Drupal site, and I'm an administrator, and I want to be able to, maybe I'm a school, and I want to be able to enable site-wide notifications so that I can say when school's closed for a snowstorm, right? That's what I need to see on production. So the value-adding time here is the time that it took creative and development to build that thing, right? That's 8 hours, right? It's a pretty straightforward thing, perhaps. How long did it take from when the stakeholder, from when the marketing or the web manager for the school said this is the thing that we need? It took 120 hours. So it took a really long time. So if you measure that, you could say our flow efficiency here is 6.6%. So I don't really know what that means. It sounds kind of low. There's not really this desirable flow efficiency number, but it's something as a team we can look at and say, hey, I don't know what the desired flow efficiency number is here, but 6.6 sounds a little low. What would have had to change here to maybe get this to be 10%, right? Or 12%? And 9 times out of 10, we found people will say something like, well, I just had so much to do. I was just working on so many things. I was juggling a lot of work in progress. So when we shifted to this flow efficiency strategy, right, the time with development and creative remained the same, 8 hours. The task wasn't more complicated. It didn't take the creative team any longer, right? But the time period, how long it took from when the web manager said that it was a requirement to when it was sitting on production was 24 hours. So we've increased our flow efficiency there by 20% or a little less than 30%. Right? We didn't work any faster. We didn't work weekends. We didn't miss our kids' games. We just kind of brought these ideas that we've been talking about, limiting our work in progress, visualizing the board, and kind of bringing that to light on our teams. So it's more, we found, you're not pursuing a 60% flow efficiency strategy. It's more about kind of measuring this in an effort to discuss it as a team to potentially increase it, right? This may be the fastest that team can work, and that's fine, right? As long as you're talking about it. Because in order to know if you're improving, you have to be measuring something. So when do you start the timer? Quickly here. And when does it end? So to do, and again, this is all based on organizational politics, organizational situations. We've seen situations where you start it when it becomes real, right? This team, to do is just managed somewhere else. They don't have any insight. This team has nothing to do with to do. That comes from marketing. Marketing puts things in to do, and then they decide, they drag and drop, and they put the highest priority to do things at the top. The team then meets perhaps on a weekly basis, pulls them into analyze, and discusses what they mean, and decides on their acceptance criteria, their definitions of done, and whatnot. So when it's being analyzed, it's adding value to the idea, right? You're contributing to it. And then you're perhaps moving it to selected for development, which is just another way of saying it's waiting, right? It's waiting for someone to become available. So you're not adding any value there. So to do, moving it through. And how many of us use Jira or like an electronic project management tool? Cool. How many people and I know we've been here too, you load up your board in the morning and it kind of looks like this, right? You're like, oh boy, wow. There's just so much going on here. There are so many columns. There's so many things in every column. What does this column even mean? The person who created this column isn't even on this team anymore. So if you're thinking about wanting to go 60 miles an hour, right? If you're thinking about the team getting things done faster, getting from A to B faster, moving the thing faster, it's pretty difficult when you got to go down a road like this, right? So queue hygiene is something that the team should also be talking about on a regular basis, right? If you want to get your good ideas and action quickly, you got to make sure that your road's nice and paved. Otherwise, you're just wasting time navigating around it. So just in a traditional retrospective format, perhaps, to quickly recap here, what stayed the same? So what about the way that we worked as a team did we like? What made sense? What fit this way of working? Right? A lot of our teams were already multifunctional, right? So they had a wide variety of skill sets, so they could help remove blockers from each other. The team was dedicated, so we had project teams that didn't have this was a huge thing for us, didn't have the interruptions of the ongoing support work, the ongoing maintenance work, so they could focus on builds or building something, a feature, kind of on their own. Their queues, this just kind of happened magically, but it's not always the same. We were pretty religious about our queues, and so they were pretty clean, so it made it a little easier for us. We held daily stand-ups, and we really like our retrospectives, right? Those were super helpful to have in place when we think about change management, right? And making sure that we're hearing everybody and talking about how to change these things as a team, rather than someone external from the team coming in saying stuff like, I saw this talk at Drupal Camp Texas on flow efficiency, so that's what we're doing today. We're flow efficient today, right? That stuff takes a lot of time to build up naturally on the team. Or maybe not. You're like, I went to this talk on flow efficiency and none of it made any sense. That's not the way we're going to do things. We're going to stick to this, stick to our way of working. That's also fine, right? But what did we change, right? Instead of optimizing ourselves to keep individuals incredibly busy, we said, what's most important to us as a team is getting something from A to B as quickly as possible, right? So team members became attached to the work rather than work being attached to the team members. And the team members would then pull work. They decide in that daily stand-up, in that planning session where they review kind of that to-do list, they decide what's a good fit for us, what can we do, we're going to decide this together, and that takes a tremendous amount of autonomy, I think. And our retrospectives, big fans of these. These are really the heart of how a process like this could work and how teams can improve, right? And there's this great book by Esther Derby who talks a lot about retrospectives and getting teams to go from good to great, right? Oh, the book is called Agile Retrospectives, Making Good Teams Great. And I highly recommend it. It's a quick read. And she's got this 5-step model that could be run. If folks are familiar with this, Scrum is a really great introduction to this, and Scrum talks a lot about retrospectives, and you can Google, and there are, Black Swan Farming, all these great sites that show all these great little activities on how to do retrospectives, all the games that you can play. But I think if you boil it down to the heart of it, right, you've got really these 5 steps that you're trying to achieve every time. So what did we learn about the way that we work? We started with what we had. We didn't spend a dime, right? We had conversations as a team on who we are. We're the right people for the job. We have the right tools. We have the right space. We have the right work. We prioritized our work. We visualized our work on that board. We try our best to limit our work in progress, but we know that sometimes there are things outside our control that do make us juggle things. So we remain flexible to the fact that sometimes we do need to do more than one thing at once. We commit to these retrospectives that we hold. Some teams at least every other week. Some teams retrospect on a weekly basis. Some teams call things out as they see them as ways to improve, and that's fine too. And our goal as a team is to deliver things faster to our customer. Agile and Lean, all these things, right, are about experimentation and learning. There's this utopian state, and you'll probably never get there, and that's just reality, but there are things that could be done perhaps to kind of start from where you are right now and begin the journey of improvement and perhaps arrive somewhere that's a little bit better than where you are right now. Things are getting done a little bit faster. Value is being delivered a little bit faster. Anyway, it's a journey. It's a long one. Enjoy the trip. And I hope you get some feedback. And we've got time for questions or comments or people who have their own ideas about all of this. Because this is just where we're at, but I know there's a lot of literature out there that may... Or has anyone tried anything here and it's just like this didn't work?
We are in a situation where we will never be able to be dedicated to one project.
Yeah.
So we're trying to figure out how to implement some of these techniques, within that environment, because that's just always going to be the case. I'm struggling a little bit with what the main difference. Would you say that this is just kind of best practices for Agile?
One follow-up question for you, if you don't mind me asking.
Yeah.
So we hear too that like individuals need to be split among many teams. Is that kind of what you're saying? With
Depends on how you're defining your team, but yes, I guess so.
So like one person may be
Like a
on
project team. Yes. So like for example, I'm a content strategist. I have 5 projects going right now.
So you're writing, in this example, content for 5 different projects.
Yeah.
And that's just also from because there's probably the reality there where you're scheduling things.
Right.
Development may not be ready until some point, and then you've got to, of course, it may be a little bit late, and now you're running over to that to get that the content that it needs.
It's like 5 concepts for each project. So I hear you on the cognitive load, and I love the idea that we would have like a dependencies column that's like, you can't work on this right now. Here are the things you can absolutely work on right now. But
Yep.
my column would always have quite a bit in it just because there's quite a few projects and little tasks for each of the projects.
And writing content is a lot like development, where it takes a tremendous amount of focus, and interruptions just... There's like that chart that people talk about for developers. Every interruption costs 4 hours or something like that.
And I am the bottleneck you're talking about, so I'm very interested in kind of updating our process and just trying to figure out what the main differences are between, kind of Agile best practices and what you guys are doing.
Yeah. So of course, a lot of how I would start thinking about that, and your situation is loaded with context, right? So I'm only braced with the fact that one person trying to do things for 5 different teams. So you've kind of become perhaps like a subject matter expert. And I've got some thoughts on your question, but I'm curious if anyone else has heard about this at their organization and maybe has tried something that we could entertain. Because it's a tough one. Yeah. So it sounds like you are on. Are you on a team, or is it just you?
I have a team of content strategists, and then we are each assigned out to a bunch of projects.
Okay, so there's like a few of you on your team, and would it never be a situation where someone would be okay with one person on one of your teams finding themselves on the actual development team? Are you building like products, or are you building sites?
It's an agency, so it's a marketing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, building websites. I'm not sure what you mean by on the development.
So we're working on this project right now, where essentially it's going to launch on Friday, right? But there's next Friday, but the site doesn't have any content in it, right? And it's like, whoa. Traditionally, there'd be a bottleneck there as you wait for someone on a content team
Right.
to come around and being able to do it. So one of the things that we changed about the way that we work is we had that content person. They transitioned to be on the actual team. So they've been writing content for this site ever since there was the initial bare bones Drupal instance up and running. Does that make sense? So that took a lot of talking about, because it's a very abstract idea.
Yeah, I guess I don't understand what you mean by on that. So like if we have multiple projects, and so we have cross-functional roles that start out on this project. So there would be a developer, a content strategist, a writer, all those things from the beginning. So in theory, I guess we're already doing what you're saying, or maybe I'm not understanding.
Well, it sounds like there are bottlenecks that are developing, but so perhaps we could sidebar that one. Yeah. Because I'm curious. I don't know if there are any other questions.
I actually do have a thought, which I guess is kind of to the side of that, is we have probably about a dozen websites that we're working on. Probably 2 of them are high content update turnover with a lot of different content owners, effectively. And so we're at the same time, we're also doing development. And so we're pretty much been doing all of our content changes in Jira as well as our development. And so we've basically got this mash of this is our ticket system.
Yep.
And it's like we're working toward splitting things up so that we don't have that case.
Yep.
But as a result of having all that in there, there's this, what is taking time, what is taking the most time in terms of looking at stuff. You can't really tell because there's development and then there's just content turnover and changes on the website.
Right.
And so I don't know how that necessarily relates, but I just wanted to present that as a similarly messy and hard to pull apart state.
Right. Yes.
Sure thing.
We've.
We use the filters in Jira.
Mhm.
We just call it multi-boards because you have your different projects and they're separated in different things. And if you do a filter where the filter is pulling all the tickets from all these multiple projects, then you can set it up into swim lanes where it's like, here's your content and here's your development, but you see it in one spot. So there's no like traveling over to this board and then traveling over to this board. It's like one space.
You can even add go even further than that, because that's if you're using Jira, that's a great suggestion, and add a component to it. So if you could have this is going to get like super Jira-y here for a second, if that's all right with people. But you can have if you're using Jira, okay, cool. So very much like that, you can use labels and tag. Huh?
So we work together. We use higher now.
Atlassian's
Workfront.
Workfront?
Yeah.
Okay. So
But not exactly.
one cool thing about Jira is because very much like the way that we organize ourselves is that we have development teams that will build things, but they definitely run into dependencies where the creative team is, as much as we shoot to have the creative team, someone on the creative team be a member of the development team, they're their own team and they hold their own stand up based on the work that they've got. So how that kind of works is there are swim lanes in the project board for the actual development team. So as the structure of something becomes available, we work on structural things first, building the content types out, and then along the way you may do page displays. But so you can tag things using labels, but also with components, as this needs content. So it can show up both on that project board, and then also if you have a content team, your content team can have their own board that looks exactly like with these WIP limits. So your team can be moving things through. And just as you're marking things as moving along, the other team doesn't need to look at your board because Jira will also update their board. So they can see, I'm not too sure, like some agencies that we work with, it's very traditional in the sense that like all the pages get built and themed and then the content starts. Whereas our approach a lot of times is like, when you have the least amount of structure that you have in Drupal, you can start adding content, right? Because we want to get that feedback from the content editors on that content editing experience. But definitely, like sometimes in larger organizations, that's almost a non-starter. So, as a thinking there. Any other questions, comments? Cool. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Looking forward to feedback if people had a chance.